The Strasburg Railroad is known as one of the best turn-of-the-century steam railroading in the world. Nicknamed the Road to Paradise, millions of people have ridden the tracks for over 190 years. The railroad gives the riders the same experience as if they were riding back in 1915. The Strasburg Railroad is like a museum on wheels. The only difference is operation. The equipment doesn't just have to look right. It needs to work right, which usually requires machinery from the early 20th century. The steam locomotives themselves need to be restored and then torn apart. The train's cars also require back-breaking work, with most being piles of rushed and rotted wood. The railroad offers beautifully restored wooden rail cars and a 45-minute, fully narrated ride through picturesque Amish country farmland. All the workers at Strasburg do an amazing job at operating and restoring the locomotives and rolling stock. Today, the Strasburg Railroad is known as one of the best turn-of-the-century steam railroading in the world. But the Strasburg Railroad wasn't always a tourist operation. In the early 1800s, Strasburg, Pennsylvania was a growing town, a major stop on the Conestoga wagon route. When railroads gained in popularity, wagon routes became obsolete, and Strasburg, Pennsylvania lost money and was bypassed by the Philadelphia and Columbia Railroad, which missed Strasburg by a few miles. The town of Strasburg petitioned the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in 1832 to build their own railroad. The charter was issued on June 9, 1832, and the Strasburg Railroad was born. This makes Strasburg the oldest continuously operating railroad in all of North America. In the first few years, the railroad was a horse-drawn operation, until they got their first steam locomotive, the William Penn, bought in 1851 but built in 1836, and believed to be one of the first 50 steam locomotives built in the U.S. The railroad held freight and passengers to the main line at Lehman's Place Junction, where people could catch connections to larger cities such as Lancaster and Philadelphia. A steam mill was built in Strasburg in 1866. The railroad changed hands several times, but the freight and passenger operations stayed strong. When the streetcar reached Strasburg in 1901, run by the Conestoga Traction Company, which made a direct connection to Lancaster, the line suffered major setbacks. In 1918, State Senator John Hampshire bought the Mill and Railroad Company. Cars were becoming popular, passenger numbers declined, and the railroad primarily became a freight operation. In 1926, the Hampshire Mill decided steam was too expensive and bought the Plymouth gas locomotive. From 1926 to 1957, operations continued as normal, hauling freight from the mill to Lehman's Place and back. By 1957, the railroad was in horrible condition, and the first steps to abandonment were being made. Ads were put in the newspaper and buyers were sought. Henry Long and Donald E. L. Hollock, longtime train enthusiasts, went around looking for people to help invest in the purchase of the railroad. Henry Long and his investors came up with an idea to get more people to buy. They went around asking people if they would like a vice presidency spot in the company. They had many executives, but there wasn't much real railroading between them. Most of the VPs spent the months before and after the purchase cleaning up the railroad for operation. They didn't hire out any of the work. They did it themselves, learning as they worked. The early days when all wine and roses. The condition of the track and rolling stock faced them with many different challenges. Were all met with good fun, common sense, and elbow grease. In the early days, the operation was much more relaxed. The VPs and their guests rode the train whenever they wanted. But word was getting out, and more people started to come to Strasburg. The railroad was running on weekends, but soon it was not enough. Tourism was starting to take off in the U.S., so the timing of the railroad was perfect. The railroad acquired more coaches, and in their first full year of operation, 1959, the railroad served over 8,000 passengers. At this point, the Plymouth locomotive was severely taxed to pull all the cars up the hill. They bought their first steam locomotive, number 31, former Canadian National 7312, which was a 060 and was the first steam locomotive brought back into FRA service in the U.S. The railroad needed a station, and they bought a Victorian-style station from East Petersburg and shipped by highway to the East Strasburg. On Labor Day weekend 1960, the new papers advertised that the railroad was running steam. That weekend was a major success for the railroad. Also in 1960, the railroad was lent Pensy 1223 by the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania, which hadn't been built yet, but the rolling stock was seated at Strasburg. In 1962, the railroad bought the second locomotive, former reading number 1187. Renumbered to 4, the railroad found 4 had to refill after each trip it made in 1967. Strasburg 4 was removed from service. 4-seat idle at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania for 53 years before being bought by the Age of Steam Roundhouse in Sugar Creek, Ohio. In May of 1967, the railroad acquired its second steam engine number 90 from Great Western in Colorado. 90 is a Baldwin decapod. In July of 1972, the railroad acquired Canadian National number 89. In 1991, the railroad acquired N&W 475. Past, present, and future, it all comes together of the Strasburg Railroad. Although it is only a 8-mile round trip, it is a 100-year journey into our collective past.